So we've got a packed agenda, so I'm going to recommend that you're probably going to want to download the recording of this session and listen to it over and over again because we're going to cover a lot of ground. Basically, we're going to cover 4 different steps in making a strategic ERP selection. Step 1 would be to align your strategy with the ERP selection, taking your company goals and identifying those. So in understanding the executive information that's going to be necessary and using scorecards and dashboards, using the technology that's available nowadays to measure these things on a daily basis. Step 2, we're going to talk about how you transfer those requirements to ROI and how you take current state to future state. So basically documenting existing business processes and then planning the future of the business being the key. So these efforts at the early on in the cycle will be the foundation of a proper cost justification and create milestones for the project. Thirdly, we're going to talk about how you define what system is right for your company. We're going to talk about something that we call an ultra verticals and drivers for those verticals. In other words, decision drivers that will make the important definition of what's unique and what's right for you as a company. And then step 4, we're going to actually take those understandings and we translate them into understanding the costs associated with the metrics of the business, identifying the roadmap for the project driven by future business processes, and develop a detailed ROI. We will review how to ensure success of an ERP project. So let's start with step 1, strategy in ERP, understanding your company's goals. So the idea here is to move from your individual goals as a business and identify those as metrics that you can identify as measurable on a daily basis or monthly basis, whatever the correct frequency. One of the things that we found at Ultra is at least 1 out of 5 ERP system justifications are really tied to this one thing, the ability to have real-time information. High-ranking executive not having the information that they need to make decisions may actually drive the decision to invest in new ERP. And our experience with most evaluations is this is one of the constant reasons to invest in ERP in the first place. So when you talk about ERP, we again want to drive home the idea that this is not just about identifying new technology to replace your current system and basically keep things status quo. This is really about a business transformation. So we feel strongly that ERP should be among the top 2 projects for the company. And also you want to consider why you're looking at ERP. Is it because you're going through rapid growth with an old system? You're making acquisitions and you're wanting to merge multiple systems. Maybe your business model no longer fits with the current ERP. Current ERP may be risky. It's not, support is difficult, resources to support the system, and maybe it's starting to become a risk factor in the company, or maybe it's just time. So when you're looking for ERP, identify what your goals are, and then we'll talk about how you can actually make that a meaningful journey, a business transformation. The other thing to consider beyond your own business is the threats to the business that come from outside sources. What are your competitors doing? Are your suppliers going to be an issue? What outside factors need to be considered? Maybe economy, new business models, maybe you need to develop a better go-to-market strategy. Whatever it might be, these are all things to consider when evaluating ERP. One of the key things that is helpful, and we often encourage our clients to develop these metrics early on in the process of implementing this project. So before you even select ERP, build a inventory of good metrics that help you to measure the business and measure the performance. This is a great way to see, how you've done with the implementation and how if the implementation is actually giving you payback. So you can set metrics that basically define the key factors in your company. For example, monthly sales with a sales goal, meet or exceed, monthly operating income. Maybe you want to look at monthly late orders with percentage of total orders, make the stock. Maybe you want to focus on service level, and maybe customer satisfaction value ratings to exceed a certain percentage. So the goal here is to look at the needs of the business and measure the performance of those business. So it's really kind of a high value task to try to develop some of these metrics ahead of the project so that you can measure the success as it moves through the cycle. Another way to look at metrics is through dashboards that are geared to roles within the company or roles within the enterprise. So you can look at metrics based on financial goals, maybe a number of required contracts awarded and in place, maybe margin or annual sales revenue, maybe looking at it from a customer or stakeholder, customer retention rate, average time to resolve a customer inquiry, number of customer complaints. And then there's the employee side of it too, also measuring employee performance and their learning and keeping track of their growth within the company. So this is an example of another way of creating metrics to make them by a particular role or function within the company. Here's an example of a template that you might consider using to create a tight model for driving execution of your strategy. So basically, you're taking a goal and you're tying it to an objective with a measurement and then a target measurement that you're measuring up against, and then closing the loop with an initiative to drive the strategic execution upstream. So the idea here is you want a good, solid, tight model where everything is aligned together. We found that most organizations have part of this map but may not have it completely drawn out. So think of this as a placemat or a graphic that you can hand out to all the employees and then focuses them on the goals of the company with specific measurement and a target that is driving the initiative. The key is really for the objective to be directly tied to the measurement, which is then directly tied to the target. This must be a clear line of sight. A good strategy is to develop a good set of key performance indicators or KPIs that can be used to measure the before and after picture of the impact of the ERP project. These would be typically viewed through a dashboard. So what I want to do is actually kind of give you a little teaser. I'm going to hand it over to Karen, and she's going to give you an example of how these dashboards actually work in modern technology and how they really add value to measuring the goals of the company. Karen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Marty. All right, so as Marty mentioned, we're going to see a couple of examples of dashboards based on user role and some of the metrics that can be defined and measured based on the activity that's happening in an ERP software. So I have a couple of roles here that we're going to be basing on, and one of them is going to be for a sales type of user, maybe someone that works in the CRM world. And we have several metrics here that we're using as examples, but you can see how you can define what those key performance indicators are and generate these dashboards for you, design them based on the information you want to monitor. So we have data like win-loss ratios for opportunities and quotes that are coming through, analysis of our gross margin to our sales, and, you know, multiple items here that give us visibility of how the company is performing from a certain point of view. We may have some additional roles like a general manager or an executive type role where they're going to see different departments' performance in one single view. So they can monitor sales, shipping performance, as Marty mentioned, maybe some quality incidences, you know, any type of data that you want to publish out and have a quick high-level view of how your business is doing can be tailored in this type of view. Now, not only do you have that graphical representation of the data, but you can also drill down to the information that is populating those charts. So we're going to use this one as an example to analyze our sales. So we can drill down and analyze the information that is coming through. So these are the numbers that are generating the chart we were looking at from our starting view in the dashboard. Now, you can see here it's already organized by different product groups or product categories, and I can see it for a certain number of periods going back in time. But I can continue to drill down into the information from that dashboard. Maybe I want to focus on a specific category of fabricated products. Well, I can select that row and quickly focus and look at the breakdown of the dollars associated to that group, and maybe now categorize them by a specific part number. So just with a couple of clicks, I can get a more detailed view of the information and maybe even generate new reports or views for my dashboard. Maybe I want to have this represented now by product. I have a tool here that allows me to turn that into a chart. And in this case, we have all these different categories, so it may be more meaningful to put it in a pie chart type view. But now I can publish out to my dashboard and have that visibility. So the filters and categories that you see defined here are going to be made available based on what your needs are and how granular you want to get to the information that is feeding that view. So we give you the tools and the training so you can work with the existing dashboards and edit them to create your own. So this is kind of a quick teaser, as Marty said. So we hope this kind of gets the point across, and always picture this as something that would be available for all the different roles in your company based on what their needs are, how to measure their performance, and make it friendly and simple for the users to work with. So with that said, I'll turn it back to Marty.
Thank you, Karen. So what Karen just showed you was the example, as you mentioned, a teaser for future state, thinking about the future and how you measure your company goals against the initiatives. And we wanted to give you that as a kind of a reminder that you need to, when you're looking at an ERP project, you need to focus on the future. But the first thing is to focus on what you need to know from where you are today and how to get there. So that's what we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about the process of going from requirements to ROI, current state to future state. So most of the businesses, processes in your company have probably changed over time. They probably evolved as the business changed, and the systems that you currently have may or may not have. So ownership of the process sometimes passes from one person to another with minimal documentation. At least that's what we've found. So the ERP justification process is the opportunity to rethink not only why, but how your organization currently performs your business processes. So how should this stage of examining business processes work? So after defining the scorecard that we talked about and dashboards that you want to utilize going forward, the second thing to do is to look at your current state and of the processes that you run in your business today. So set a baseline initially, gather key performance measurements and values over the past 6 to 12 months. Key performance indicators may be driving to scorecards and could include productivity, quality, overtime, inventory dollars, or even throughput cycle time. Obviously, your company might not be actively measuring some of these performance categories right now, but if you can begin measuring these now, then you'll have a good start on the baseline and speed up the adoption of the dynamic scorecards and dashboards. Next, conduct a current state review. This should be conducted with the process owners and the teams within that business discipline. In other words, the process owners of that process. Looking from the top down at your business model and value streams, and then looking at the business process inventory, all the different business processes that you go through in your daily operations, and drill down to the functional flows. And we found it very helpful to develop process maps. Process maps are created for each function, and they're usually summarized up to the primary ERP-related process flows. They should be created at the functional level, for example, at the design, planning, scheduling, or production level. This assures that the many sub-processes within the overall process are covered. Also, these detailed maps can be summarized to create the top-level cross-functional processes. Now, the process flow that's documented here becomes an excellent tool for identifying waste in the process. One of the other important functions of current state process map development is the identification of what we call non-value added activities or wasteful activities that exist in your processes today. Often these non-value add activities have been developed over several years to address shortcomings in the existing system. And it evolves into a culture within the company that we've often seen as often quoted as, we've always done it this way, explanation. So typically when we work with projects teams, we're able to identify dozens of issues per process map causing waste within the current business process. So we find it's very helpful to capture these wasteful processes on what we call an activity matrix. And this is basically a list that can easily run into triple digits of content. We ask that our clients do this because it's important that these issues get prioritized so the wasteful processes can be eliminated in terms of the most value returned to the business. And then we use those as the root cause solution definition and then mitigation. So in summary, document the current state of your processes in detail. Next, identify the issue causing delays and non-value-added activities, and then set priorities and begin to develop solutions to these challenges. Also, share your findings. Often we find that this is some of those aha moments where many senior executives might not have first realized the extent of waste or problem areas in a particular process. But once a current state map is completed, it defines the processes visually, and those issues of waste really come to the light of day. Step 3 is mapping your future state. So you take your current state maps, and this is often the most difficult step in business process improvement since it requires an understanding of the weaknesses in the current process and an understanding of what is possible with improved technology. So at this point, your team has begun to develop supporting relationships and gelling as a team. The team has also developed a solid understanding of the current state of the business practices that are in place today. So in mapping your future state, each of the key stakeholders or process owners of your business need to be involved. So at the beginning of the mapping of your future state, your current state documentation or the existing processes are reviewed and ideally workshopped through a facilitator through a redesign of each of the business processes with a resulting future state process map. And the output of the future state mapping session is a detailed process map and a definition of the best practice process steps that your company would like to implement. As your team develops the new process maps, they determine if the process can be implemented with current technology or if a process requires new technology. Often in this stage, we found that many clients find that some things can be eliminated without new technology, and this is great for getting ready for the new technology when it's time to bring it in. Your team and stakeholders that are asked to map your future state should look at those steps in the current state processes that are shown to have the potential to be eliminated. And these could be simple things, something like emails being used to obtain approvals or emails that are used to communicate the completion of a process. Many of these non-value add processes might already be identified by spreadsheets that employees have created or maintained to supplement perhaps the shortcomings of your existing system. Beyond looking at wasteful practices, your team should discuss what processes are currently happening outside your formal system, of what types of value-added activities could be brought in-house. This could be processes that you currently outsource, but it could also include tasks that customers have to take on themselves because your company's not offering them right now. So again, this is a high-value exercise. The final step is to thoroughly document the future state and communicate the newly designed process to the rest of your organization in formal sessions. So we find that going through the current state documentation and future state mapping, your team has likely covered a significant level of the improvement potential that exists, and there's a pretty good chance employees who aren't on the core team will see further improvements that can be considered if not added. So sessions like this also provide your senior management with a forum to communicate that not only will jobs not be lost as a result of the improvement process, but the value of the employees will become more focused and more effective. The future state is the basis for your organization's understanding and ultimately their buy-in to the project. Now, one of the benefits of the future state process definition is this can actually be worked into the implementation process that you go through with the partner. So here's an example working with Creative Technology and Epicor where they have built-in process mapping. So you can take your best practice process maps that you've designed internally and share these with the implementation team and they can turn these into actionable process flows, thus shortening the implementation time drastically. So this really really adds a lot of value to your ERP implementation time frame. So now that we've talked about going from current to future state, let's talk about how do you determine what system is right for your company. Let's talk about what verticals, industries are served by different software vendors, and let's talk about what decision drivers are. At Ultra, we've identified about 15 key verticals or segments within a manufacturing and distribution environment. So these are, we can find within these verticals different ERP systems that are written specifically for distributors that do not have manufacturing, bills of materials, or routings. We've also found, manufacturing ERP systems that may have limited warehouse management capabilities. And in process manufacturing, we see the need for recipes or formulas to drive production. So typically in process, you find that the unit of measures are typically in volumetric units like pounds or gallons, and you need to have decimal points in your formula. So we've listed 5 unique verticals in process industries, each with specific capabilities. As we look at discrete industries, consumer goods are typically make to stock, as they will end up on a shelf at a retailer. Industrial parts may be stock, make to order, or engineer to order. The remaining verticals are all driven by make to order or engineer to order capabilities. So in these companies, product lifecycle management, or PLM, an integration of a CAD drawing with the ERP is important. And also sometimes a configuration tool may be appropriate for creating a customer order specific to their requirements, like a configuration of a computer or a car. So to identify these different industries and the unique decision drivers that are behind their unique functions, and also we've developed a decision driver matrix. So a decision driver is a feature of an ERP system that is important to the potential buyer of the ERP, which will differentiate the vendors. In other words, not all vendors will be able to meet these requirements. So as we look at this, as it gets more, this you saw a cross example there, a very brief example. But as you can see, it covers a lot of different categories: technology, company structure, accounting, customers, warehousing, and logic. And we've identified about 60 of these decision drivers. The list does grow as certain industries, evolve. But basically, we've identified 60 drivers that are important to consider when looking for the right vendor. The industry that your company fits into, the vertical that your industry fits into, is a very important thing to consider. So we want to take a little break here and have Karen demonstrate a couple of different key vertical decision driver functions that would apply to a specific industry. We're going to take a look at a discrete make-to-order environment. So basically, we'll take a look at 2 different industries. We'll take a look at aerospace and defense, and we'll take a look at a discrete industry that's in a make-to-order industrial environment. So if we look at aerospace and defense, you've got different categories, and you'll find these are fairly common across multiple industries. But when you look at the decision drivers, you have some specific requirements: milestone billing, configuration, margin-based pricing, integration with PLM, engineering change. And we're going to focus on 2 different processes that are very unique to aerospace and defense: flow down and quality management. And then we're going to also take a look at the make-to-order industrial equipment environment, where again you have a similar list of categories, but again when you look at the decision drivers, you're looking at some very different functions like engineering configuration, flexible pricing, integration with PLM. And we're going to focus on something that's very important in this kind of environment: integration to CAD drawings. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen, and she can demonstrate these 2 different industry-specific decision drivers.
Thank you, Marty. All right, so switching over here, back to the system. So as described, the first thing we're going to talk about is some requirements that are very significant in the aerospace and defense industry. So the first concept we can talk about is contract maintenance. So in this vertical, we have specific requirements to flow down to the transactions that are going to be related to a customer contract. So we have an element here called a contract record. and that is going to be associated to a specific customer effort, and it's also going to be within a certain effective period. But the key factors here that we want to talk about is the ability to assign a rating to the contract, and that's from the a priority rating from the Defense Department. So when you associate this attribute to the contract, you want to make sure it flows down to the related production transactions and any purchasing efforts associated to the contract. So this is something that is critical, and you want to make sure that it doesn't have to rely on having a user manually control that at all those individual transactions. So by defining it at this level, we'll be able to tie it in to all the downstream of flow of our process. And we'll see how that relates to the rest of the system in a little bit. We also have flags like the DCMA approval requirements. So from the Defense Contract Management Agency, there may be certain areas or stopping points in your process where you need a sign-off from the assigned agent from the Defense Department. So by flagging this, we alert the system that this will be a requirement, and the system will enforce that process to stop until we receive the required approval sign-off. Same with the first article inspection requirements. So we need that to be seamlessly communicated to the production team if first article inspection is required for the contract. So this will flow down and be very visible in any documentation that goes out to the production floor to identify this as something that must run through our production area. So once we've defined these factors, there's going to be an order that is established for what the customer is expecting to purchase and receive. So we go to our sales order screen, and that will have the product requirements of what we're going to build for them, quantities and prices, but most importantly, our contract definition. So the sales order is associated to that contract we established, and all the requirements flow down to it. So we want them to be visible at this level because there's going to be a need for us to build the product and buy all the components needed for that. So we need that priority rating to be visible all across the board. So once we have an order established, there's going to be a production job that gets generated, and it's going to be linked to that specific sales order, so that relationship is always visible. And of course, there we have our contract factors again, the DPAS rating, the first article inspection, and all the requirements that we defined on the front end. So in the industry, most of the softwares will rely on the users manually updating these statuses or flags. So it really becomes helpful when you can just take care of all of that in the front end, and then just let the system carry that along and flow it down to all the areas where it is required to be visible. Another area that you can define at the contract, or another piece of flow down information, is going to be related to quality clauses. So inside the same contract screen we were at, we're going to have a section where you can look up from a pre-established library any applicable quality clauses that you may want to flow down as part of this contract specification. So this list right now is just showing us the clause numbers, but that's actually coming from a library that you would have preset in the system with all the applicable clauses that you would have across your contracts, and you can even have attachments and documents laying out the full text of that clause information. So this library feeds that viewer is just looking at back here in our library view. And you may include the full text as part of your description, or just have a small reference as we have on these other ones. Now, where this is going to be communicated is especially relevant in purchasing transactions. So if we define clauses either at the contract level or at the item level, we want to make sure that those are communicated to third parties that we may be working with that will fulfill those material requirements. So going back here to Epicor, we're going to have purchase orders associated to our contract. So in our purchase order entry screen, we can see, well, first of all, the materials and components that will be purchased for a specific contract. Again, we have the DPAS rating clearly visible there. It's going to be also printed out in the purchase order or included in that PDF that we submit to our suppliers. And then at the individual component level, we have a comments area where the cost information will also flow down to. So it could be a simple reference, as you can see here, or it could be the full text, and we can allow for, a significant number of characters here, so you can have the peace of mind that you won't have to manually either type in or define these on every single purchase order that you process. So that's some of the value that this adds, and just so you can see an example of what a purchase order might look like that has those clauses. Let me close this one right here. We have our purchase order, and you can see the clauses are clearly printed out and included in that supplier-facing document. So again, those requirements are specific to the aerospace and defense industry. On the other side, we also have some examples to show you for the make-to-order, engineer-to-order type vertical. So for that, we're going to go into our CAT-link integration. So back here, we're looking at a screen called part maintenance. So inside Epicor, this is where we define the products that we make, or that we deal with in our business. And as part of that definition, we have engineering revisions associated to them. So if we look at this particular example of this satellite assembly, if we look at our revisions tab, we can see the history of all the engineering revisions that this product has gone through. You see that we currently have B as an effective and approved revision, and currently working on revision C being redesigned as part of an engineering change effort. But so Epicor keeps track of all those engineering revisions here historically, and behind each of these revisions, we have bill of materials information, possibly routing information, and any supporting documents that engineering would have associated to that. And what we're going to walk through here is how do these revisions get created, and how do we integrate with CAD systems to make that transfer of information from one system to the next pretty seamless. So for that, I'm going to switch over here to another product. And the reason I wanted to show it here is because you can see that there are no revisions yet for this particular item. That screen is completely blank. So what we're going to do is launch our CAT-link screen. And this interface will allow me to retrieve a SolidWorks file, which is the CAD system we're using for this example. And we'll be able to see the components and the items that make up this particular assembly here in a little bit. But looking at this file, the system has the ability to analyze it and put together a bill of materials. So we're going to click this button, and it's going to give us visibility to that indented bill here. You can see it's going through all the components. And as we expand that, we'll be able to see the attributes associated to each of the items that make up that bill of materials. So we have different attributes and categories that the system has recognized based on the mapping from that SolidWorks file. And all these different levels are clearly identified here. So what's going to happen when we save this transaction is that this bill of materials is going to be committed to Epicor, and that item that we were looking at a few minutes ago will now have a revision A associated to it with all the details behind it. Now, this preliminary view of the bill of materials allows us to, identify any items that may be new or that may be new additions to the system. We also have logic we can put in place to generate new parts. So if there are any new components coming through as part of that SolidWorks file, the system can assign smart part numbers based on any sequential formats that you can configure in the system. But with that said, let's click on our Save button right here. It's going to go through that list and verify all the items and commit them to the system in Epicor. So successfully committed. I'm going to close out of here. And I'm just going to go back to the screen where we started for that component. And all I'm going to do is hit this refresh button right here. And you'll see that we now have revision A with today's date, and it came through. So just to show you what's behind revision A, those changes that we just committed from CatLink, I'm going to drill down into a screen called Method Tracker that will show us that indented bill. So if we expand our materials list here, there are all the components and all the sub-levels of what make them up. So all of this was just done with a couple of clicks from our CAD file. And this type of functionality is not only applicable to SolidWorks, but really any CAD system that, is part of the industry. We already have built-in integrations for those, and it should definitely have an improvement in your processing time and in capturing data back into an ERP. So those are some of the elements we wanted to show you today. Just as Marty mentioned earlier, this is just teasers kind of what an Epicor ERP system has to offer. And if you're interested, we'd be glad to show you a lot more. So with that said, I'm going to send it back right to Marty so we can continue our webinar.
Thank you, Karen. That was very, very helpful. We wanted to make sure that you saw an example of a couple of really key industry drivers that actually are available through the various vendors, and Epicor being one of the leading vendors in this marketplace, supported through Creative. So we're going to come into our last stage here, step 4, and this is where you understand the costs or the investment involved in developing an ERP implementation and project, and how you realize the future ROI from that project. So the big question is, what are my expected ERP costs? Obviously, with the ROI, a cost for ERP turns into actually a meaningful investment for your company. So basically, this is, of course, what is my ERP cost? A typical question as you head into an ERP project. So an important part of justifying investment in ERP is understanding the true required ERP costs and investment. The calculation of cost is determined and changes by numerous factors: the type of industry of your business, the number of users and range of features needed. This will actually drive you to what we call different tiers of vendors. So there's tier 1 for the very large customers or more complex customers, tier 2 for the less complex but nevertheless feature-rich requirements, and then tier 3, which are typically the smaller vendors for companies under 50 million or sometimes above. It really depends on the features that they're looking for. And also you've got to take into consideration the level of customization required. Careful analysis of these various components can need to be part of a true ERP cost calculation. So what about ERP implementation costs? So we usually advise our clients to begin assessing typical costs of ownership of the various ERP system options that are under consideration. Typical costs include, but of course not limited to the list you see here, the acquisition costs all the way down to the recurring costs. One of the items listed here, the recurring cost, should be really carefully considered. For example, if you have a legacy ERP system, you can find that sometimes ERP legacy systems can drain resources when it comes to the ongoing effort of maintaining the software. Also, over time, maintenance costs rise, and many organizations we team with are grappling with recurring costs like high annual fees, complex upgrades, migrating in customizations, and dealing with integrations. So this is a very important thing to consider. What are the costs associated with the way you deploy your system? So basically, whether you're deploying through an on-premise model, where the software resides on your premises, or a software as a service, what they call SaaS, software as a service model, where it exists on a virtual private cloud, or what we call a true cloud model. We've singled out deployment here as a consideration for handling your total costs, as there are now multiple options for deploying ERP, so there are various cost considerations that go along with each of these. There's a bit of a unique vocabulary that is associated with cloud. So before we touch on cost considerations, let's look at some high-level definitions of these terms: on-site versus off-site, or on-prem or in the cloud. This implies that the software is not in your building, but is off-site, either deployed with a hosting provider or by a vendor at their site. A SaaS model, the software as a service model, is standard in true cloud offerings where the payment is made monthly or annually as a subscription versus licensing the software with a 100% payment at the beginning and paying annual maintenance, which is typically anywhere from 20 to 22% of the initial purchase. The key benefit we're finding to the purchase of a true cloud solution is that all the upgrades and maintenance are performed by the vendor. The staff within the business no longer needs to include trained professional database administrator or technical systems analyst who knows all the ins and outs of your specific version of the software. What are the costs associated to buying software in whichever model? So again, one of the things to look at, this is a rule of thumb, is to count the number of users of the ERP system in the office, exclude the warehouse and manufacturing users, except the supervisor and managers. We would estimate those are the employees who would use an ERP system at least 15% of their day. Take that number of users and multiply it by $3,000. The resulting number is the base software cost of the ERP system with named users, not concurrent. This is terminology that you'll find as you start negotiating with vendors. This is very different. Now multiply the software cost by 2. By doubling the number, you've taken into account for the minimal consulting services required to implement the software. So then consider if you need more hardware and then add the numbers up. Similar math for cloud solutions. However, you find that cloud solutions tend to be slightly less expensive as these solutions offer more self-paced education and focus on not having to change the software. So remember, these are guidelines. These aren't written in stone, but they're just a guideline to help you determine the investment required to put in new software. Notice that these customers don't include any other additional applications like CRM, any advanced planning or WMS and execution systems that might be added to the system. In our experience, business may forego the formality of a proper analysis when it comes to projects that they classify as just-do projects. But within a manufacturing environment, for example, a lot of times outdated machinery and other intuitive or obviously plant assembly or supply investments need to be maintained and replaced in order to maintain the business. Regardless of the obvious investment or if an investment requires justification, a proper business case should be conducted to ensure the investment is basically 3 things. That it's defined and accountable, it's budgeted, and it's aligned to your company's objectives. Your company should have gone through the exercise of business process mapping like we talked about before. So we're looking at a BPI, current state, future state, that we talked about in step 2. It is this improved state that drives a return via process improvements. The deliverables from a business process mapping, they often provide your team with the gap analysis to ensure that the business case for ERP is well defined. So we find that during the future state definition, the metrics that are established provide the foundation to measure the results and therefore establish the targeted goals for both the internal project team and the vendors, enabling your investment to deliver upon the expectations of the business case. And because of the upfront discipline of actually mapping your current and future state, that implementation cost is reduced. Therefore, it ties into the value return from the investment. Let's talk about some key functions that you will receive benefits from within the ROI calculation. Let's talk about savings from real-time information. So we consider some of the benefits here. Real hard savings relate to things like inventory reduction through better forecasting, reduced days outstanding through better management of the invoicing process, a reduction of headcount or minimally keeping the same headcount while allowing for growth, or redeploying that headcount into more strategic roles. We saw an example of the CAD integration to the bill of materials. You have somebody transposing all that information. Currently, just think of the time savings that would be associated with having that be automated. Other things would be inventory management, where you would be having better visibility to sales demand and forecasts, and also identify slow-moving items. Supply chain management, where you get a better understanding of your network from supplier all the way to customer. Product development, better designs through your PLM, and this should lead to cost savings in both manufacturing and purchasing. Sales management, better close rates by knowing the pipeline and focusing on the right opportunities. Pricing and margin management. Often robust pricing tools that come out of modern ERP and add enhanced visibility to margin and profit analysis, and this can drive improved competitive positioning. Forecasting, this can take you through being sure you have the right inventories and service levels in most make-to-stock environments. Production management, this is the ability to track and complete production orders and looking for exception management when dealing with production delays. Quality management, better quality of the hidden cost, which shows up in scrap and rework. New ERP with quality modules can drive big benefits here. Employee retention, just from having an ease of use, integration with existing office functionality, all these help as employees don't have to work so hard to navigate the system. Warehouse management, better inventory promising. Financial management, knowing your P&L within a few days of the month end or looking at a P&L on a more dynamic basis. Direct benefit here would be a reduction in AR with better invoicing and credit management. And then things like e-commerce extensions, opening up to direct-to-consumer selling channels, maybe enabling customer self-service or better communication with your vendors. Then there are soft savings that we could consider. These are a little bit harder to recognize, but these are the soft benefits that really add value from the perspective of the executives. And these are typically realized after the system is implemented. So these would be things like customer satisfaction improvement, better access to information like the scorecards and dashboards we saw earlier on. And then ease of use, less time training, and increased employee retention. So that's the conclusion of our presentation. I want to leave you with 4 key takeaways before we go to the wrap-up. Your key business strategy is driven by metrics. These metrics should drive the future state vision. Your solution should be focused on the right vendor for your business and industry, and the ROI should tie back to the future state vision.